Black Women Worldwide has a global footprint. We are currently in 236 cities worldwide. And those cities include Alabama, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Illinois, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. We are in several countries, including the United States, Albania, Benin, Botswana, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Ghana, Ireland, Italy, Kenya, Liberia, Malawi, Niger, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Thailand, Togo, Uganda, Ukraine, United Kingdom, Zambia, and Zimbabwe.
Welcome, everybody. I am Camille, pronouns she, her, and I am one of the members of Black Women Worldwide. So I am so excited to be here to see everybody. Yes, so we have our special guest. So I want to be sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it just EmmoLei?
Yeah, EmmoLei Sankofa.
Perfect. Thank you. I always want to be sure of that. I really hate this question, but I do have to ask you. Tell the people, who is EmmoLei?
That's a loaded question.
It is.
But I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm an artist, composer from Atlanta, Georgia. Spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. Just got back to Atlanta, actually. But I've pretty much been a musician and an artist my entire life. Started singing in the choir at 2 and just progressively, got deeper and deeper into music since then. I've done a lot, but I guess we'll get into that later. But, at the core, I'm just a human being, artist, composer, and then we'll expand, I guess, as we go. Yeah.
I like that. I know, Blair, you're really, really big on really just humanizing people and us humanizing ourselves, and it just being like, I'm human. And I feel like oftentimes in our introductions, we forget that. I forget that all the time. So I appreciate you saying that. Blair, you're also into music as well.
Into is an understatement.
Yes, so true. You like our music.
And so I'm really happy that you're here today, EmmoLei, because I'm familiar with some of your work, and when the bio kind of circulated, I had the opportunity to kind of dive in deeper, and I love the fact that it's multidisciplinary creativity, because no person who is truly creative does one thing.
Correct. I agree.
And oftentimes we put people in a box, and we do kind of take away a lot of their humanity by just saying, well, you just do this, when there's an opportunity to kind of talk about all the things. So I have a multi-layered question, EmmoLei, that I want to ask you.
Okay.
And, kind of, how did you pick the things up along the way? Give us a little more origin story, and then kind of give us an idea of kind of how you started to collect these different, modalities of creating along the way.
Okay, so I guess, like, as I mentioned during the introduction, my mom literally had me and my sister in the choir at church at 2. So it all started there. My first instrument was violin. My mother played violin. My father is also a musician, literally my whole family. So my mom played violin. 2nd grade, I play violin, don't like it. I'm like, eh. And, 3rd graders third grade was the introduction to band. So once I got to 3rd grade, I'm like, okay, I'm switching to band. Switch to band, pick up saxophone, and then play saxophone all the way through elementary school. I get to middle school to join band. I decided not to tell the band director that I played saxophone, because actually when I was in elementary school, I wanted to play drums. And so, percussion in general is like a thing that everybody wants to do. The drums is like the cool thing that everybody wants to do. So the band director was like, hey, it's too many people playing drums. We got to get some horn players. So that's why when I got to middle school, didn't tell them. So I started completely fresh, new, in middle school on drums. So that was like the turning point for me, because that's literally what I stuck with all the way up through college, because I played in college, high school, all of that. As a producer, I kind of started getting into that maybe in high school, actually middle school too. One of my peers introduced me to FL Studio, and it was actually through a project that we had to do for social studies. And he made the beat, wrote the lyrics, and I'm like, yo, what, like, how did you make that? Like, how are you making this? So he put me onto FL Studio, ran home, told my dad, I'm like, yo, I need this program. And then that was another turning point for me. So I started making beats and exploring FL Studio and all that in high school, kept going all the way through college. And then when I got to college, I studied music recording at Hampton University. And one of my professors said to me, hey, you should look into film scoring because your sound is very cinematic. So explored that. I guess throughout grad school, I went to grad school at Savannah College of Art and Design. So I learned more about the film world and just continued to refine my skill set as a musician. And I think I just naturally, in terms of just like the visual stuff that I do, like I kind of do photography as a hobby, but I've showed some of my work in like different galleries and things of that nature. But I just gravitate to that because that's kind of like sometimes my downtime when I'm connecting dots musically, I'm exploring the world through photography. And so that's how that kind of came into play. And then even like I directed my first music video, Triangles, which I've always had ideas in terms of just assembling things together. And I always have very like vivid visuals in my mind in terms of like what I see from my work and everything. And oftentimes like the visual part of my releases comes first. So that kind of shapes the tone of what the music will end up being or whatever the case may be. So that's really how like the visual side kind of just quietly integrated itself into my workflow. You know what I mean? It was, I feel like you said, everyone that's an artist, and I'm careful about saying true artists because we express ourselves differently, but I have recognized the common thread where people who are really deep into their practice often are good at different things or explore different things to come to the conclusion. Yeah.
Practice,
yeah.
Levels to the
levels
to the level of expression, what you want to do, how you express people is levels. So
yeah. And it's like it's almost like when you're, it's almost like I forget who said it, but I've just, in studying and like being inspired by a lot of different artists, I've noticed that some of the artists that I gravitate to don't always hang around the people in their discipline. They're hanging around like architects and scientists and people in different disciplines. And in doing so, they learn things that inspire like progressive things like in their art, you know what I mean? And so like my brother's into architecture, like I love architecture. You know, like I said, the visual photography, design, all of that kind of inspires and gives me ideas musically that I don't think I would necessarily get just hanging around musicians all the time. You know what I mean? So I don't know, that was a low, but that's just kind of how, you know, I'm existing here.
I like how you said that too, because I think oftentimes we are kind of taught about this whole like this expansion of that whole idea of like birds of a feather. And it's like, no, actually, like I don't want to hang around a whole bunch of people who are in the exact same field as me, because first of all, what is that doing? I want to reach the masses, hopefully, with whatever I feel like my gift is. But also, like you said, I want to pull inspiration from all of these other things to really kind of help me to also just hone in on my craft. So I really like that. So you touched on the church, and I think what's really interesting is how, so I'm a preacher's kid, but I'm not, nor is my dad now that I think about it, still very indoctrinated into the church anymore, in that there's a lot of shit that just comes with that, I think. And so I guess my question for you is, though, do you still kind of feel like you pull from like a spiritual realm when you're creating your art? And if so, is that different, or is it different from like your church uproots or upbringing, or is it still kind of rooted in that kind of Christianity?
So that's a really good question. Here's what I'll say. So spirituality is completely, like, it's definitely still rooted in everything that I do, not just like in art, but just how I navigate life. In terms of Christianity specifically, or just the things that that I absorbed just being in church growing up and all of that, it's kind of like when you realize and then you zoom out and look at a lot of the different religions, everybody's kind of saying the same thing differently.
Yep.
So what I realized was that what are the lessons and the things that are being taught, and take from that versus kind of being cemented into what a preacher is telling you or what someone else is kind of like expressing to you. And also, I'm just naturally curious. So I like to investigate and find things out on my own. So my curiosity kind of leads me just as much as my spirituality, which I feel like those go hand in hand. Musically, I mean, I grew up in a Black church. So that definitely played a huge role into like my taste musically, like what moves me, how things feel. And that's a thing that happens with a lot of musicians. Like actually playing drums in church was my first job. So I mean, it's like, I don't know, music at the end of the day is a spiritual thing anyway. It's like the way I describe it is like people talk about divine feminine and divine masculine. And when I think about that, I think about light and sound. So sound, light come together. That's like yin and yang, you know what I mean? And that's why I feel like people in the arts play a huge role in terms of influence, because at the core, those principles and those things are what move us in ways that we don't really understand. Like it hits our DNA. It's vibrations. You know what I'm saying? If you look at light waves on a sheet of paper, it looks like sound waves. So it's like, you know what I mean? These are things that are resonating with our molecules and things that we can't really even understand. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like what I've grown to understand it as, in terms of the integration of spirituality into my work and the influence music has on people. And at the end of the day, you could play some chords you hear in church, and it happens a lot in like popular music. And it resonates, you know, it resonates the same. It's just the lyrical content is sometimes different, which that's a whole nother layer. But I mean, I feel like music itself is church, because a lot of times when I was in church, I would be excited to go just to hear the music. You know what I mean? Like that was like the music was popping at my church. So,
I was just about to say that it's something about praise and worship for me that, and not this new school, like we don't have choirs, we just have a praise team, and barely even that, like praise and worship. I mean, like God's property. Like it's something about it where I can listen to it now, I can listen to it like 50 years from now, and it still like sends chills up my spine. It's something about praise and worship that I'm just like, wow, like this is it. Like I don't really need to hear anything else. I don't need to hear the pastor preach anything. Like this is it. I like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of like how it fits for me. Now I can go deeper, but that might be a whole nother segment. But yeah, but at the core, that's kind of like where I'm at with that.
It's really interesting to listen to this, just because I am a straight up heathen. And it's not that I straight like from the beginning. Just it's not that I didn't grow up in Black church or have Black church experiences, but I didn't grow up in Black church the way that most people I know, and even a lot of people that are affiliated with BW kind of have been in that. It was always I was already like early on going to a non-denominational church. My parents were divorced, and so my dad is Catholic still to this day, and then my mom went to a non-denominational church where actually Sankofa is actually one of the symbols. It's on my back, it's tattooed on my back, but it's also one of the symbols for the church head. So it's really interesting, this like in between that I've never really experienced from that, but having an understanding of it, because Black music is universal, as we know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of leads me to, because you kind of started to touch on some things that are a little more, I won't say spiritual, but traditional African elements of how things actually go down in terms of connection through DNA, in terms of like kind of all that jazz. Now you say, you know, like I grew up in church. Tell me the point in time where you started to shift in terms of learning this real information about traditionally how we've always kind of existed, because I hear that you were like, oh, that's way deeper, and I'm like, it is way deeper. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, so to be honest, like even at a young age, like I was questioning a lot of things. Like elementary school, I remember asking my mom, like, who made God? You know what I mean? And it kind of started there. And I guess throughout like maybe high school into college, and just as you grow and start to learn more about the world, you move away from home, you're kind of separated from what your parents are instilling in you, and you're like among other people who were raised differently, and everybody has different points of views and perspectives. And it's like, oh snap, like not everybody was raised the same, you know what I mean? So it's like, again, it goes back to my curiosity of always like seeking, I think it boils down to seeking truth. And I think that's a huge thing, because I feel like at the end of the day, sometimes truth is relative, mainly because if you're not there to experience it, you're always listening to someone else's take on it. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I've just been curious about what created what exists now in terms of what we believe. Why do we believe the things we believe? Like, what is the foundation of what these things were built off of? Because even like actually in history class, I took like AP World History and all that kind of stuff. And the teacher we had was like really revealing stuff. I don't think a lot of teachers were teaching the stuff that he was teaching. Like it was like, yo, this is heavy. Like even about Catholicism in terms of how they manipulated the masses to get them to do what they wanted to do. Like a lot of people were illiterate. The preachers, the Bibles were in Latin. So it's like you're basing everything off what someone is telling you and not knowing yourself and not investigating yourself. And so it was like a lot of things, a lot of methods and things that were implemented to control people's minds. So I'm like, okay, why was this the case? Like if this is based on love and all of these principles and more, and moral codes that are good, why is all of this other stuff tied into it? So it's like when you start investigating the origins of things, and it's a long train, you know what I mean? It's like you can't even dig everything up in a lifetime. And it's like I've also learned that some things will just not be answered, and you have to live with just the unending curiosity, like why is this the way it is, you know what I mean? But like I said, it just boils down to my curiosity, seeking truth. In high school, I think was like a real turning point for me in terms of like wanting to know more for real, and actually like going to investigate, and even sometimes challenging like my parents' points of view. Because I also realized that my mom and my dad, like my mom would always get us to church, but my dad didn't always go. And I always wondered, like, you're home, how come you're not going with us? You know what I'm saying? And so that's when I also started getting curious about what my parents' beliefs were separately, because they were also raised differently, different denominations. I think my dad was Baptist, my mom was like AME. So I mean, even though it's still kind of parallel, my dad believes a lot of things that my mom doesn't, necessarily believe. So it was just interesting. And even like connecting with my grandfather, who's like a whole nother situation. He lives in Egypt, but his perspective on just life and spirituality and stuff like that helped me understand who I am in terms of like why my curiosity about things is so strong, because he's kind of the same way. So it's like, it's a lot of different things that kind of like influenced what my understanding of things and like why I pursue certain, I guess just why you pursue certain types of knowledge or information, I'll say, as you're just growing. And I mean, I'm still alive. So it's like every day you're still unfolding, you know what I mean? You're still learning. So it's like, I'm not ever at a point where I feel like I know everything or I know all that I want to know. It's like, I learn something new every day that kind of takes away what I thought was the case maybe a month ago or even a day ago. You know what I mean? So it's like, just being agile in the way that you think and your thought process, and kind of like, I don't know, this going into a whole thing of like judging other people and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So I hope that answered your question.
I have been, so I am a behavioral scientist at for my job, and I'm married to someone who is, so curious. And I think it's so dope and so beautiful because it's almost like in like a childlike way where it's like, no, like so hearing you say this, I'm like, yo, like she should like link up with my wife. Like, I'm not kidding. But I've been really into cults, not into them as in like participating in them, into like watching them and binging them. And I think what I think is so interesting is just how similar cults and religion are. And somebody on one of these shows, I think it was like the one about Scientology, they were like, the difference between oftentimes a church and a cult is what happens when you leave. And that a lot of what happens when you leave with these cults are some of those more overt kind of methods of either abuse or trauma or whatever. And that there at least is this thought that you can like freely leave a church or freely leave like these other religions, which as we know isn't always the truth. I would love to talk to your mother. My dad actually was a pastor at a church, and like I said, he no longer does that for various reasons. But I mean, it's very, very interesting. So I want to kind of touch on, I know you mentioned going to the HBCU. And one of the things I have found, so I went to PWI, but one of the things I've kind of found is in some of the ways that I am talented, be it like naturally talented or just things that I've worked on, it seemed as though when I was in a predominantly white setting, that I didn't necessarily have to work as hard at like that natural talent. Like that essentially it was almost like I had to kind of hone in on my craft, which I think I now know with how we are socialized, especially how we're socialized to kind of perceive ourselves within this proximity to whiteness, that the perception of my being good at things, it was almost kind of like, and I hate to say this, and I don't mean this in like a rude way, but it's kind of like how like white people are like fawning over somebody like Lizzo, who like they're doing it because she's so in their minds like good Black, right? And so I think I kind of have had this like revelation in my life that when I was younger, I think white people saw me as that way. But when I got around Black people with the exact same talent, I really had to be the best because we are such a great people. So when you think about your time at, I think you said Hampton, how was that? Did you ever have any of those feelings of, I guess, what we now know as like imposter syndrome or anything like that because you were around all this greatness? Or did you kind of have that kind of perception of like, I'm not comparing myself to anybody, like, this is what I'm doing, this is just me? Because I also think that whole sense of comparison, we know, has been fostered into our community since slavery. So how did you kind of, if you did feel that way, how did you kind of reckon with that?
So I had an interesting upbringing. I was born and raised in Atlanta. So the phrase Black excellence that everybody's throwing around now, I grew up in that. So I was never confused about who I was, my place in the world. I was never measuring myself against white people or what white people thought of me, because every school I went to, predominantly Black. My teachers required, from elementary school, even before that, required a certain standard out of us. So it was the norm for us. So I didn't start realizing, to be honest, like any of the stuff in terms of like my proximity to white people or anything until I went to grad school, which was a PWI. And that's when I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I was maybe like one of 3 Black people in my grad cohort when I came in. And so there was a huge switch for me there. And it wasn't a thing where I felt like less than, or I felt threatened, because at that point, like I'm completely secure in who I am. It's just like, yo, this is the stuff that everybody's been talking about. And it was like, I would talk to my mom, like, I peep game. This is the stuff here that is like the real world stuff that I just didn't experience as a kid. And even like my peer group that I grew up with, like a lot of us are still close friends now. And it's like, I mean, it was just different for me growing up. So I don't know. I think we might have had the opposite response in terms of just like engaging with white people versus like our own. And I think when I got into a space like at a PWI, it made me want to work even harder, because to be honest, like I saw a lot of the BS, and it's like people, they're skating by on the bare minimum. And my whole life, I've been required to work at a certain level, which I'm not opposed to ever doing that. But it's also like, they're getting this thing working at the bare minimum, and I'm expected to prove myself way above the bar that they're working at. I had an issue with that. And so that was the switch that went off in my mind, like, okay, this is an interesting dynamic here that I don't really like. And my mom actually grew up in Denver. So a lot of what you kind of experienced, she did, because she grew up in a lot of like mixed schools, predominantly white schools, and she went to Spelman. So she was completely culture shocked when she went to Spelman. And moving to Atlanta from Denver is a huge shift. Like, so for her, that was her experience. And I think she realized like what a special place Atlanta was. And I think that's why she made the decision to raise us here, because I feel like that completely like molded us, like me and my siblings, and even just a lot of my peers that I went to school with, that molded us in a different way and prepared us differently for the world than a lot of people that I've met like after graduating from high school and even college. You know what I'm saying? Because when I got to college, I realized like, hey, a lot of kids are coming from pretty much backgrounds like yours. And it's like, you realize that the rest of the United States is not as colorful as where you're from. And it really was an incubator. You know what I'm saying? So I just like in my adult life, I'm like, man, I will not take Atlanta for granted. You know what I mean? Because it was just, man, it's just crazy, the mental impact and the emotional impact that growing up in a space where you see your people, you see like politicians, all the politicians are Black, business owners are Black, you know, all your teachers are Black, like parents, 2-parent households even still makes a difference. And even when it's not, you have parents that are involved and stuff like that. So even, and not all of Atlanta is like that, but even just honing into the community that I grew up in, it was like, you know, that completely made a difference in terms of just how I see myself and in terms of just my surroundings and the world. And I'm never really measuring myself against like white people, because I peeped the BS when I went to grad school, and I'm like, we're not about to do this. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's definitely interesting, I guess. Yeah.
That's I really enjoy that take, and it's really interesting to hear your take as well, Camille, in terms of even formulating that question. As somebody who grew up in Detroit and really encountered white people in high school heavily, even at 14, I was like, oh yeah, nah, this is okay, I see what this is. And never having moved from Detroit until I moved to Atlanta, and that was my Jesus year. I was 33. And it was like, oh, this reminds me of the crib, where it's just consistently everywhere you go, everything you do. I mean, you know, it's just Black people everywhere, and you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you learn those lessons from people that look like you. And it's a vastly different experience, and you are totally right, Emily, in the fact that I think it fortifies your consciousness of self It fortifies your self-esteem in a very particular way where you like, well, but I'm me though. And not even from a braggadocious standpoint, just I've looked in the face of people who look like me. You rock crowds of people who look like you. So it does have a particular tilt. And that's interesting, that connection of like going to a HBCU and like all of that, because that's definitely an experience I've never had and always wish like, wow, I wish I took college more seriously in general.
Yeah. And you know too, there's even pockets of Atlanta where you have like different types of Black kids that are interested in different things that are not necessarily quote unquote Black. Like we got skate parks around here. We got people that like were into alternative music, just like, so you get the whole situation. It's not just like the trap stuff that people see like on TV and the mainstream. It's like Atlanta is a really like diverse space in terms of just the kinds of things that people can get into and all of that. And, regionally, sometimes there are limitations, but that's the case wherever you go. And even like when I did my residency in South Africa, there was another switch for me where it's like Black people and brown people are actually the global majority. And we've been made to feel like we're the minority. And so for me, that's another thing that leads me and leads what I do. It's like, you're never going to make me feel inferior because I already know what's going on. So regardless of what you say, regardless of how you move, it's just, okay, duly noted. And I'm going to pivot around and move through whatever you're trying to block. But even still, I don't move in a way where I'm like necessarily getting too bent out of shape about the way someone treats me, because that's a direct reflection of what they're going through internally. And I'm not taking that stuff personally because I don't have time to deal. That's not my issue. That's something you have to deal with. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and I've never got into a space where anyone's like actually that's in California. That's a lot, because California was my first time actually experiencing racism directly, which threw me off guard because we hear all of these great things about, California is so free and accepting and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I'm not too sure. It's like it's a very passive aggressive type of situation. And so that threw me off. That really threw me off. But other than that, I don't think that, like, I'm not really moving throughout life worrying about like, what people think about me, any of that. It's like, at the end of the day, I could be the villain or the hero, depends on who you talk to and depends on when they met me in life. You know what I'm saying? And I've accepted that. We've all been the villain, we've all been the hero. So it's like, that's how life works. You know what I mean? So
absolutely. That's super crazy. And to Camille's point too, like that's what I find in California, that racism in California feels a lot like racism in the suburbs in Detroit to me. It's like going to Birmingham, where it's like
AKA where I went to
really be here, but do your thing, and it's like
AKA where I went to high school. Yep.
Right. See, that's
Birmingham.
And I heard
exactly.
So I want to kind of go back to your creative process a little bit, and often I probably am a little extra with creatives when they come on here, because I'm just always really curious about people's process, because it's all vastly different. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and this is kind of a specific question, but could have lots of different varying answers. A lot of people that I know that are really prolific in terms of being creative have synesthesia. Are you familiar with synesthesia? I'm sure
I am. Yes.
Okay. Do you have synesthesia?
I don't think so. I think for me,
because everybody might not know what synesthesia is.
Yeah, okay. So I'll let you define it.
So synesthesia is defined as your senses, like you may experience something in one sense. So, hey, I'm experiencing audio in a sense. I may actually see colors from that audio. I may actually feel feelings from that audio. It is a interwoven way of feeling that happens with your senses. So your senses overlap each other, basically, is what it is. So okay.
Yeah. So I guess musically, like when I hear sounds or when I hear music, I don't necessarily see colors or like taste anything or any of that. But I just visualize stories. So I don't know if that's completely tied to it. Because I see visuals in my mind sometimes that kind of help me like develop the storyline for music that I'm working on, or I don't know. It just depends. It varies from project to project. I wouldn't say I have it as hard as like maybe, because I know Pharrell, like he's actually one of my favorite producers, but he said that he has synesthesia, so he sees colors when he's like creating or listening and stuff like that. And I would actually love to experience that, to see what that's like for different people, especially people whose taste buds are kind of like activated when they're listening to music. That's like, what is that? But to be honest, I don't know. I wonder if that might be disruptive to my creative process, because it's almost kind of like people who have perfect pitch. And when you have perfect pitch, it could be a little much. It could be overwhelming, because it's like when something slight is off, it's like I need it to be what it is. I had a classmate in college who had perfect pitch, and he was a little quirky, but it was just insane kind of watching him like navigate stuff. And he would just be on the elevator and be like, that's a G, like the beat in a, you know what I'm saying, in the elevator. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's so crazy to me. So yeah, but kind of not, I don't know. I don't think so, but yeah.
So kind of, I mean, I think it kind of has to do with this, but it may kind of segue a little bit. Do you feel like, and I really think this is an overused word, especially in 2020, so I hate to even ask, but do you feel like you're at all empathic? I feel like people who are in touch really with themselves on a very organic, spiritual level, and then on top of that, when they actually have the ability to like put it out there, like to, and regardless of who it may reach. And again, I really hate this word empathic. I swear I do. But like, do you ever feel like you feel things in this very, very like deep, very organically like spiritual kind of way? And if so, does that ever kind of disrupt or encourage your creative process?
I do feel like I'm like that in some ways, because it goes back to what I was going to go into in terms of judging people. It's like when you understand that, number one, I always say like we're forever unfolding. And again, like we've all been the hero and the villain. So giving people the space to correct themselves or to just to not judge, because like even thinking about like people who are very provocative just politically or whatever, or just even like criminals, it's like when you start tracing it back to even their childhood, because I always look at adults and I say these people were once children. So when I look at people who are like who've like murdered people or just done some stuff that's like morally wrong in our society, I look at them and I start tracing. It's like something I see in them where I start tracing back to their childhood. Like what was the turning point that made you like this, or that what did you experience that turned something in you in this way? And they say sometimes people come as they are, which I believe, but we're also molded by our experiences. And so I really try to move in a way that's judgment free. Me and my girlfriend have actually been watching 60 Days In, which they send people who volunteer to essentially be informants. So they live in the jail as inmates, and they're like, the inmates don't know, the COs and stuff don't know. And so they're observing and figuring out like, okay, is this jail being run correctly? Or like, you know, what are the inmates doing? And a lot of times the humanity in these people that are in jail is revealed every single time. And it's like, man, like this one, I mean, even just like these Black guys, like the one we're watching, the Fulton County Jail, which is here in Atlanta. The stuff I saw in there, I'm like, yo, that's crazy that these people go through these things and they're treated like this. And it's like, yeah, you may have done something, but it's like there's still basic level things as a human being that you deserve, no matter what you've done. And it's just like, in those moments, I feel deeply, and I'm like, it's almost like, do you guys have Macs? So on a Mac, you can kind of like back up your whole computer on Time Machine. And it's like, when I'm looking at people and I'm trying to get to the bottom, like what happened, it's like my mind is cycling through them like that in Time Machine. I don't know what that is about, but that's how my mind like kind of is like analyzing them. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes I'm even prompted, like when I meet people like that in person, to kind of like ask, like, what, you know, how was this? And you see, they just kind of let their guard down because they're not being viewed as a threat, or it's like, finally somebody wants to hear about them. And really a lot of times that's all they wanted, is someone to listen to them or figure out or ask about them, like ask, you know, certain details about them that they just don't get a chance to reveal or see even what they're passionate about. So it's just like always trying to see the humanity in people. I think is where that comes in for me, and just and moving about, like no matter what people have done, even like Kanye is not popular right now, but like it's still kind of like listening to people, because you can find a lot. If you just listen, you could find a lot of things out about people and what is bringing up the actions, like what's prompting the actions or what inspired them to make certain decisions and things. And again, it's not always right, and you don't always have to agree. That's the beauty of life. You can disagree but still respect people's humanity. You know what I'm saying? So that's just kind of where I'm at with it.
That's really interesting you say that, because that is a really interesting phenomena, to be able to just kind of look at a person and see into their soul kind of immediately, have this immediate connection with who people are. And it's a little bizarro, because you can just kind of, and not from a judgment space, just be like, oh, huh, you have had some real trauma, buddy, or you know, whatever the case may be. And I think the clarity of vision that comes with creating kind of happens in that space. But here's a question that I have for you. It sounds like when you read your bio and you look at all the things you're doing and all the things that you're kind of with your foot, your toe, your pinky, your mind in, one of the things that's really interesting to me is that we all have these experiences that change us. We all have, you know, we have a song where I was one way before the song was done, and after the song was done, I was a different way. And that's a little bit every time, right? But there are experiences that we have in tandem with other people where it's like, I am not the same as I was 2 hours ago or an hour ago before this. Can you speak to some of the experiences you've had that like literally kind of you walked into it, and the moment you kind of walked into it, you began to be transformed in some ways, even though I know you said we're always unfolding, and we are. But like the ones where it's like, this hit me like a ton of bricks kind of thing.
Yeah, so my release Geometry, that was actually a huge turning point for me. And if you've listened to it, like it's a love story based on it uses like geometric shapes as a metaphor to kind of tell a love story.
Definitely listen.
Yeah. And so the characters that are incorporated into that, what prompted me to write that, like kind of after writing literally the first song for that project, my mind just did a switch. Because sometimes when I'm writing or like creating music, I'm addressing feelings that I did not address in the moment or in that situation, or stuff that's actively happening. And I find that once sometimes I make a song about it, or even like a project about it, or whatever the case may be, it's like a flush where it just, everything immediately goes away, because I feel like I've reached a resolution, whether I've reached a resolution with the people or resolved the situations, it doesn't matter at that point. It's like the resolution for me we've arrived at that point, and I've kind of detached from it. And sometimes that can be kind of, that could be good and bad, because I found that sometimes it makes me detach from the work, And that could be a problem when it comes to like like you performing it or talking about it, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like you still have to perform for people, or perform it like for the people, for the audience, in a way that's like kind of like them hearing it their first time each time. And you have to put that energy into it when you're doing so. So I've had to be, I don't want to say careful, but I just have to be conscious about the way I interact with it once it becomes like a dump for me. Because I'm like, okay, cool, on to the next sound, on to the next thing. And it's like, it's almost like a timeline. You know what I mean? And even like with you saying that, I think one day when all this stuff started happening to Kanye, I just sat down and listened to like all of his albums, one after the other. And each of his albums is actually it's almost like a chapter in a book, where you can see everything that he's talking about lyrically is aligning with what's happening in his life. And it's like, if you want to know what, even the messed up stuff, he'll reveal it in his work. He talks about fucked up stuff he's done. And it's like, dang, yo, really every artist, you can find the truth of who they are in their work. Most times, more often than not, even when you have people collaborating and writing and stuff like that, there's always some type of alignment with what's happening in their life. And I think in this space where we're like consuming media and art so much, I think that gets missed. And I think we don't spend enough time to like with the work to just sit and like, dang, who is this person? And that's why I also get why sometimes people say they can't separate the artist from the work, because a lot of times the artist is the work. And then that's where you get the complicated stuff with like R. Kelly and all these different types of people. But, it's very like, life is complex. It really is complex. But I will say that I do have a lot of those moments where it's like, once I do this thing, my life is changed, even externally, in terms of how people receive it or how much it's shared or just who comes into my life after experiencing it. It's like, okay, this is interesting. And geometry was actually definitely a turning point for not only just like my career, but just me artistically, because I kind of explored and experimented with some things that I feel I'll carry with me musically as I go to expand upon in terms of like my signature. Because like I use Morse code to like create the interludes, essentially the overture and the code and all that kind of stuff. So it's like that stuff I'm kind of bringing into like my film scoring with developing like the themes and motifs and stuff. So it's definitely like turning points that I have for certain releases, more so than others. But yeah, that definitely happens for me.
So how does it look like in your interpersonal relationships when you have released whatever it is that you've released? Because like I said, a lot of what you're saying has really resonated with me. And I am, like psychology obsessed, like 101. So my spouse, when she's like done with something, she's done with something. And I'll be like, well, are you sure? Like, are you sure you're okay? Like, talk to me about that. Like, do we need to talk to someone, to send the other? And she's like, no, really, like I released it, I'm fine. And it's almost uncomfortable for me. And I recognize that that's a projection in my process that I'm projecting onto her. But and it's literally like this very uncomfortable thing. I'm like, what do you mean you're over this? Like, really? Because she's like, yeah, like today's Saturday, that happened on Thursday. Like it's time to move on in a very healthy kind of way.
Right.
So how do you kind of manage that within your interpersonal relationships?
It varies from person to person, because I'm very much so like that. Like when I feel like I'm done with it, I'm done with it. And even sometimes in like my relationships where I'm still very good friends with some of my ex like girlfriends or whatever the case may be. It's like we're grown and we've kind of like gotten to a place where there's like, I don't know. I mean, it's not really hard to explain, but it's like sometimes people can't separate the romantic stuff from the friend stuff, and they don't feel that it can ever exist separately, just because the experience of like the romantic partnership or whatever has taking place. And it's like, that's not always the case. And I feel like even like the whole, people being in your life for a season, like that's a real thing. And sometimes it's like, you were here to teach a lesson or to reveal something to me. And even like a lot of times some people are attached to my work. It's like, if we hadn't been in contact or whatever the case may be, I may not have even created this thing. And so it hasn't been a huge issue. And a lot of times when I'm making work that's specifically about a person, I actually involve them in the process. And if they're not creatively involved, they're also just aware, because I don't like to surprise people and say like, especially when there are key things where it's like, they know, everybody else may not know, but it's kind of like, hey, like, I'm letting you know I'm writing this about you, and you may not like everything that I'm saying, but it's like, it's not personal, it's just an expression. So I've definitely had conversations like that, and it's still like a very amicable situation, you know what I mean? Because if you listen to like circles and squares, actually, they're pretty rough. Squares especially, but I think it's just always about like the conversation, because I'm always like open to having the conversation. And sometimes I just kind of have to level with people that kind of like you said, they project like their experience or the way they feel like it should happen onto me. And it's like, well, that's not how I'm navigating this situation. And I don't know, it can be very complex, but I haven't had too many crazy situations with that. It's always been like a conversation and, involving people, making people aware. And actually sometimes creating the work allows us to have the conversation, because sometimes the things that I put in my work, they're like, dang, I didn't know you felt like that. Like, had I known, some things could have been different. And it's like, they happen how they happen, but we're here, we're alive, and now we know where everybody's at, and we can move forward from there.
It's like that ability to, I can never pronounce this word, so don't judge me, compartmentalize. Did I say it right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting. I don't know how to do that in
like,
the way that you do.
Yeah, because like Will Smith talks about like I don't, you guys like watch the Red Table Talk sometimes or whatever, but sometimes when he talks, he's very good at that. And sometimes it can be bad, because like he said, he's always living in the future, and that's his way with dealing with grief in the present moment, is like detaching from it in a way where you can kind of feel like you're not being emotionally sensitive or responsive in the moment, but it's like you actually are. It's just that for the sake of just moving on and just not sulking and staying in the moment too long, you kind of have to do something to move forward. And even like, I think for me, because I feel like the hardest loss that I ever had was when my uncle passed when I was in 9th grade. And I feel like that moment, that was a moment that really taught me how to get over like deep grief. And so now, even like when like my aunt passed in like 2018, and I literally watched her take her last breath. And for me, that moment, it was no sadness. It was just kind of like, dang, like I just witnessed a spirit exit. Like I can't even explain what that was like. It was just mind blowing to me. And I'm like, yo, in that moment, I was like, man, I'm not really afraid of death. It's kind of like when you see it, it's the only thing we can't avoid. It's the only thing that's inevitable. So kind of like different moments in my life allow me to confront things that kind of help me deal with grief or deal with conflict and things. And I'm still learning, because like every interaction is different. And different people come with different types of baggage and experiences. And so it's like, it's a whole new formula and mixture when you meet and start building relationships with different people. It's like, okay, the work I thought I did, now we got to start over, because you got a whole different type of situation that I've never engaged with and experienced. So it's like, it's always a learning process.
Definitely. I love this. I mean, talking on these kind of subjects is something I'm so into. So I hate that we have to wrap up. But before we do, please tell the people where to find you. Just plug yourself, that we're all about reaching, literally Black women worldwide. And we want people worldwide to be connected to you. So where can they find you?
Yes, you can literally find everything you need to know about me through my website, and that's e-sankofa.com, and that's e-sankofa.com. You can pretty much find all of my social media there, everything, all of my work. My social media handles are at EmmoLei, pretty much. So it's EmmoLei. You'll find my Twitter, Instagram, all of that stuff. It's pretty much the same through all my platforms. But yeah, my website is like the best bet for everything Emmo.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's nothing. I enjoyed it.
It's been, it's been a wonderful conversation. I look forward to more of your music, and I look forward to connecting with you on these platforms, just kind of watching you unfold, because man, it's dope to be in the room with somebody who understands what's going on.
Hey, listen, and I really appreciate you all for building this platform. And really y'all are like scaling very quickly. So I'm in full support of what you guys are like doing. You know, if you ever need any help or whatever the case may be, like tap me. But I'm really appreciative and blessed for you guys to offer me this platform and this space to share who I am and chat with you guys. So this is really, really dope. So thank you.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening. We want to give a round of applause to EmmoLei for being here today. Always a pleasure to be rocking out this podcast interview with the one and only Camille. Who's always all smiles and bringing lovely energy. My name is not Kyra Lee, the way that the screen would say. My name is actually Monica Blair, and I'm happy to be able to be in the building doing a thing with you all. And until next time, we look forward to having you be in the space and the place to be supporting and coming along for the ride with us as we continue to scale quickly with Black Women Worldwide.
Black Women Worldwide is all about accelerating Black women in motion. Black Women Worldwide is a charitable nonprofit startup established for the education, advancement, mentorship, wellness, and financial success of Black women in every walk of life. We recognize COVID-19 as the largest disruptor to the status quo in our lifetime. During the 2020 global pandemic, a team of brilliant Black women analyzed the existing realities of millions of Black women across the globe. Our pain and our frustrations are not isolated. Using a global lens, we seek to develop the technology necessary to make protecting and supporting, number one, all Black women, but number two, all of our ventures sustainable.
Thank you so much for tuning in today to Minding Her Black Business. If you didn't get a chance to join us today, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can check out this episode. And also make sure you visit us on our website, which is Black Women, BLVCK, WOMXN, worldwide.org. We look forward to tapping back in with you soon.
Welcome home, sis.